This is the eczema on the first day, and this is the eczema after 8 days. No dietary changes, no changes in caffeine, no changes in sunlight, no changes in the shampoo, the water, the faucet, the laundry detergent, or anything else. I'm sitting here today, eczema gone. I know this sounds crazy, but that was my experience. Hello and welcome back to Field Notes Podcast. I'm your host, Eden, and thank you for joining me in today's episode where I'm going to be sharing how I healed my eczema naturally, my experience with the Beam Protocol, and finally with discovering something called German New Medicine and applying these crazy healing principles to my eczema. So if you are new to the podcast, this is kind of a part 2 to an episode where I first introduce my experience with my eczema and using the Beam Protocol to get my eczema under control. And in this episode, I'm going to kind of pick up where that one left off and talk about the second chapter or the second phase of healing my eczema using things that I learned from something called German New Medicine, which I'll spend the second half of this episode talking about. So first, I'm going to kind of recap what we talked about in the first episode, just in case you don't want to go back and listen. We're going to talk about just my history with eczema, trying the Beam Protocol, other things that I tried that didn't necessarily work or the way in which they did help. And then in the second half, I'm going to tell you about how I discovered German New Medicine and applied it to my eczema in order to literally make my eczema go away. So let's just dive in because we have a lot of kind of background and context to get to before we get to the good part in the second half of this episode. So starting off, I first started developing eczema in 2018, and it started really small. It was on one of my hands, and it gradually spread and became more and more of a problem. At first, it was only a few blisters like on the inside of one of my fingers, and it slowly spread across my whole hands. And it got to the point where first it was only on one hand, and then it was all over both hands. It was pretty much everywhere on my hand except for the back of my hand, almost like I was wearing a glove. It spread onto my palms. It was in between my fingers. It was on the front and the back of my fingers, to the point where when I first started dating my now husband, I remember holding hands in 2019, and he was like, "What is all over your hands?" And he told me that it felt like I had bandages wrapping my hands when it was literally just huge scales of skin that was constantly flaking off and cracked and deeply dry, and it was so uncomfortable. If you have struggled with chronic eczema or any chronic skin issue, oh my God, like it is truly horrible. I know there's so many other worse medical problems and health problems that people have, so I'm not trying to overemphasize how bad this was, but I just am trying to empathize with those of you who know what I'm talking about, and especially when it's on a part of your body. Like I've known people who have eczema all over their face or somewhere that's very visible, or that you use that part of your body a lot. It is so deeply uncomfortable. There were years of my life from 2018 when it first arrived until 2020, the end of 2021, when I started the Beam Protocol, where I literally forgot what my hands felt like normally. Like I completely forgot what it was like to have smooth skin on my hands, because they were perpetually in this state of full dragon scales. And even to this day, like I can still see little remnants. My eczema is literally like 97% gone. And most of the time my hands are completely clear, and it is a miracle looking at them and seeing and feeling soft skin that is like completely soft and normal, and that I can use products on my hand, like use a normal lotion or apply makeup or do these things, and it's not an issue. So like I said, slowly over time, the eczema was spreading and worsening. So first I was kind of like, this is just a nuisance. It's not that big of a deal. I'm just going to apply hand ointment. I honestly didn't even know if it was eczema. I didn't give it that much thought. I'm just going to apply hand ointment. I became a really big fan of chickweed salve, which I read was a soothing herb for eczema. And I would buy this like $12 tub of chickweed salve from Etsy. And that was really soothing. but it did not make the eczema go away. It just kind of helped the presence of it. And at that point, it was only on like a couple fingers or like in a couple places. But slowly, like I said, it spread and spread, eventually reaching other parts of my body. It spread onto my right leg. It spread onto my chest, my armpits. It was peak bad in like 2021, winter of 2021. Basically in 2021, it peaked. And that's when it was at its worst. It was all over both my hands and so many other parts of my body. And at this point, it got to the point where I was like, it is severely impacting my life. Like, I remember trying to do dishes and I would be on the verge of tears in my house because I had just cleaned the house, and the exposure to like even just gentle cleaning products, then going into trying to do the dishes, like my hands would hurt so much and I would be in so much pain that I would be on the verge of tears, or I would have to bring like my own rubber gloves to my job as a nanny so that I could wear them and use them to do dishes and other things, because it was so painful to just do daily tasks or like, you know, using certain products in the shower and that kind of thing. And so I eventually was like, what's going on? What is going on? Because I felt like I already ate a very clean diet. And I talk about this in the kind of part 1, the episode about the bean protocol, where I already ate a really clean diet. I already considered myself really healthy, but I had done so much healing on my relationship to food in releasing restrictive paradigms and releasing like militant health paradigms around food, and had gotten to such a healthy, relaxed place where I just no longer subscribed to like, you have to eat incredibly perfectly, even though my now husband and I at the time ate a predominantly like whole foods clean diet. So I was pretty just resistant to wanting to do the bean protocol for that reason. But eventually I was like, I'm going to give it a try. I had heard about the bean protocol on the Expanded podcast with Lacey Phillips so many times and had kind of written it off until I reached a point where I was like, you know what, this sounds like it would really work. And turns out it did. So just to recap the bean protocol briefly, if you're new to this, the bean protocol is a dietary and lifestyle protocol developed by a chemist and nutritionist named Karen Hurd, in which you essentially eat 6 half-cup servings of beans throughout the day, away from fat, because beans contain such a high level of fat soluble fiber that when they go through the digestive process, they bind with bile that your liver is trying to release. And that bile holds the excess hormones and stress hormones and junk in your body that is basically causing your system to become overwhelmed and manifest conditions that are associated with a hormonal imbalance. So even skin conditions would fall into this category because your body is unable to clear the excess stress hormones that are circulating through your body. And as a result of that, it's manifesting as, in this case, eczema. So by eating all this soluble fiber, essentially it's like sending a garbage truck in the form of beans into your body to bind with what's coming out of your liver, and you excrete it and you finally eliminate it. On the bean protocol, there's also a few other kind of lifestyle recommendations to it. You are supposed to eliminate coffee, sugar, and alcohol, and basically eliminate anything that could be causing your stress hormones to flare, even fragrances. You're also supposed to rest a lot and really reduce your overall stress, because essentially any burden of stress that you are adding is adding to the burden that your body is trying to clear. So I did the bean protocol pretty strictly for 6 months to a year. And within 6 weeks, I saw immediate results. And I'll put a photo here to show you what it was like in just 6 weeks. So I did go through that initial kind of flaring cleansing period in the first 6 weeks where everything momentarily worsened because it was really manifesting through my skin. And then after that, it was like amazing. All the eczema cleared up. And as long as I ate according to this protocol, not perfectly, I talk about this in the first episode, but it was very much like a type B style of doing the bean protocol. I would still have dessert on the weekends. I would still have a decaf coffee. I would still have a pastry on the weekends. I would still drink matcha or cacao coffee every single morning. So it was definitely not super severe. I already didn't drink alcohol, so that wasn't really too much of a problem. But I did follow it pretty closely for several months. And then for a longer period of time in kind of a maintenance phase for like up to a year. And that did wonders to just help get the eczema to calm down and to pretty much clear up for the duration that I was doing the bean protocol. However, the thing is that I eventually started to really hit a wall with the bean protocol. And if you have a history of just being more of a black and white type of person, or just attacking things with a certain intensity, or just when you're in that state of having a chronic health issue that's really impacting your life on the day-to-day, it makes sense that we kind of go into certain protocols or regimens or routines and attack it with a fervor because we just want to not have the symptoms anymore. And that was me with the bean protocol. I was eating so many beans. I was married to eating the beans. I needed the beans to be okay because the beans were helping me to keep this thing under control. So I became dependent on the beans. I was addicted to the beans. Okay, I'm obviously exaggerating, but me and the beans were inseparable. And that for me eventually led, surprise, surprise, to hitting a wall and burning out on the beans. I reached a point where I couldn't look at another bean. I also remember this one moment, this 1 week where I was doing the beans heavily. I would pack a thermos of like black bean soup, essentially, with like, cumin and chili powder and garlic and onion and black beans. And I would bring this soup in a thermos with me to work. And I got violently sick. It was not related to the beans, but I got violently sick. Everyone got this stomach virus. And when I tell you, I'm not going to go into the details, but after that, I couldn't look at beans in the same way anymore, especially not a black bean and especially not a black bean soup. So I basically got really fatigued from the bean. Okay, let me also just say, during this whole year, it was like roughly a year and a half, when I was either doing the bean protocol like vigorously or just kind of in a maintenance phase, and this kept my eczema in check. Like this really kept my eczema in check. It was working really well. It also had other great benefits, like my PMS symptoms reduced. I was having really bad cramps at the time, and those were so much better when I was doing the bean protocol, and my digestion was insane. It was amazing. So there were so many overall benefits, but eventually I hit this point where I was burning it on the bean, and I discovered something called German New Medicine. Now, German New Medicine was such a discovery for me. It has been a wormhole that I've been in for the last 2 years, just in my own personal experimentation. Now, let me preface everything I'm about to say with, I'm not a medical doctor. I am not a healthcare professional. Nothing I'm about to say is medical advice or should be construed as such, and seek the guidance of a qualified health professional before making any decisions about your health. Okay, what I'm sharing here today is just the perspective of a woman who was exposed to some ideas, got curious about them, and applied them to my own experience as an experiment. So take with that what you will. But German New Medicine, it's kind of like the mind-body health, the mind-body connection of like, oh, there's a psychosomatic connection. There's an emotional connection to our health issues. If you are like me and you've been kind of in that spiritual or wellness or personal development space for a long time, or even nervous system healing and trauma healing, these ideas are not shocking to us. These ideas seem a little bit obvious, right? Like, oh, of course there's an emotional component to my chronic migraines, or of course there's some connection to my chronic fatigue or whatever it might be. German New Medicine says, yeah, there's not only a connection. It's not only this mystical kind of psychosomatic, mysterious way in which the mind and the body are connected. In fact, there's a biological explanation. And that biological explanation ties specific acute conflicts to specific organ adaptation responses. And I'm going to give you an example when I talk about this with eczema. But when I discovered this, coming from this background of nervous system education and trauma healing, and just also having my own already kind of history and experience with different chronic health ailments that mysteriously went away, and being someone who already is somewhat in tune with my body and its rhythms and is already subscribed to the idea that symptoms can often be clues to deeper things. German medicine was just like, let's just take it all the way. Let's just cross the finish line because this information takes it to a whole new level. I also just want to highlight the way in which simultaneously during this time, so I'm a year and a half into discovering the Bean Protocol, I'm feeling limited. I'm feeling limited by having to eat this way all the time. It's reminding me of my health restriction era, or like my health obsession era. And it also has me kind of wondering, like, this doesn't make total sense. Like, now it makes perfect sense from a biochemistry perspective and a nutrition perspective why the Bean Protocol works. Makes perfect sense. It could not be a more beautiful invention and innovation from Karen Hurd, and I'm so grateful for it. But what didn't make sense to me is like, so I have to eat this way for the rest of my life when so many other people don't have to eat 6 half-cup servings of beans per day and never eat sugar again, and they don't have any chronic eczema. They don't have any chronic health issues. But just for me specifically, I have so much stress that I'm managing, so much imbalances, so many hormonal imbalances that are happening, that I have to constantly put this band-aid on that of eating in this extremely formulaic manner just to manage those symptoms. That to me was just question mark, question mark, question mark. I'm obviously the type of person who I like to get to the root of the root of the root of something. And though the Bean Protocol was such an effective intervention, and a holistic one at that, with no negative side effects and no kind of expiration date or warning or, don't do this or this is going to happen. It has literally no downsides to doing it. It still felt like putting a band-aid on something that I was really curious about. Like, why is my system in such a state of chronic stress or anxiety or pumping out these hormones in this imbalanced way that I have to like almost be chasing that problem with eating all these beans all the time? I personally felt that I could feel this texture of just like still chasing symptoms. And I know that's kind of like, in the wellness world, it's so normalized to follow these protocols or to eliminate full categories of food. It's still so normalized, or to live by these very rigid routines. And for me as a person and my values, that just still did not feel sustainable. It didn't feel like it was reflecting this like resilient, adaptable nervous system. And I had questions. So when I discovered German New Medicine, it was a welcome discovery. So if you're unfamiliar with German New Medicine, I have a podcast episode with a German New Medicine educator named Abigail Puccioni that I will link in the description, and I highly recommend listening to that for a more comprehensive overview. Today, I'm just going to tell you the most boiled down, nutshell, bare bones, what you need to know for the context of this episode and how I used principles that I learned to heal my eczema. And excuse me as I read a little bit of writing from the Learning GNM website, just because it's so much easier than trying to explain this to you as someone who's not a biologist or a doctor or anything like that. So basically, the premise of German New Medicine is that every disease is originating from an acute, unexpected conflict shock. So it's like a trigger. If you've been listening to my podcast for a long time, it's like a trigger. It is something that importantly catches you off guard, that's unforeseen, and that triggers the fight or flight response. And the key thing here is that conflict shock produces a response in the psyche, the brain, and a specific organ. So it produces a response in the psychology. So Psychologically, we perceive that this is some kind of threat or some kind of conflict relating to our survival. It also registers in a specific area of the brain, which is measured in German New Medicine through CT scans. And then it also registers in a specific tissue of the body or an organ, which correlates to the area of the brain that is lit up in this case. So the nature and the content of the conflict is what determines which area of the brain is going to respond and also what physical symptoms are going to manifest. So GNM kind of draws this map between all the different tissue layers of the body and organ systems of the body to correlate them to specific, highly acute conflict shocks. Something that's been so profound about German New Medicine to me is the way that it highlights our biology, and it draws attention to the way that different conflicts, different triggers, different triggering relationships trigger us in ways that can be traced to evolutionary drives. And so when you begin to look at your symptoms this way, it is a very primal and symbolic way of understanding how our body might respond to a particular conflict. Like, for example, someone coming into your territory. So like this could be an unwanted person coming in and threatening your job or something like that, which our biology may register as this territorial threat. Someone's coming in and they're infringing on our territory. Now, as a primal mammal, this is a direct threat to our survival because we can't have another alpha coming into our territory and taking it. That could threaten our access to resources, to social bonds, to all kinds of things. And so it makes sense that then some specific part of our body with territorial anger, I believe it is having to do with somewhere in the intestines, would adapt to that with a specific purpose to, okay, I need to mark my territory, or maybe it's the bladder or something like that. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm going to adapt this part of my body so that I can mark my territory better, or so that I can digest something better, or whatever it might be. So it's almost like this way in which our body is responding quite literally to something that our kind of evolved, conscious human brain thinks is so kind of complicated and evolved and totally separate from anything that would have to do with our body. But German New Medicine reminds us of the way that we are biological organisms, and we can't escape that. So let's just talk about eczema briefly through the lens of German New Medicine. So based on thousands of patients' cases, Dr. Hammer found that a skin disorder is always linked to a separation conflict, which a person experiences as if a close relational bond, it doesn't always have to be a close relational bond, but is torn from my skin. The brain scan and analyses showed that this type of emotional distress impacts without exception in the so-called sensory cortex, which is the part of the brain that developed during the course of evolution in accordance with the organization of herds, packs, and families, and the ability to express the social and emotional bond through skin contact. A separation from a loved one can be emotionally very distressing. In nature, the separation from the pack, from a mate or an offspring, is biologically speaking an emergency situation. Thus, a biological special program, that's just the way your body adapts, is in place to assist in the organism in coping with this traumatic event. During the conflict active stress phase, the skin loses epidermal cells, causing a loss of sensitivity towards touch. The sensory paralysis is a natural form of protection from further traumas of this kind. As a result, the loss of epidermal cells, the skin becomes dry, rough, and may flake. The resolution of the conflict is the turning point. Together with the healing that takes place on the psychological level, the skin also starts to heal by refilling and replenishing the ulcerated area with new cells. During the repair process, the skin becomes itchy, inflamed, blistery, and swollen. Skin disorders such as eczema, dermatitis, rosacea, or hives are therefore positive signs indicating that a natural healing process is running its course. So basically, I just think this is so cool. I think this is so cool because it's so symbolic and it speaks to the way our body truly is, the manifestation of the unconscious, and it manifests things in a symbolic way. A couple more things about German New Medicine I need to note before I then just get into my story of how I healed it. One is that our symptoms happen in two phases, as this kind of passage I just read touched on. So during the phase in which your body is under stress, your body is perceiving that you are fighting off this conflict, in this case, a separation conflict. So it could be something you want to separate from, something or someone that you want to separate from, or something or someone that you don't. It's an unwanted separation and you don't want to be separate from it. During the time in which you are under stress, so let's just say you're separate from something, your dog is sick and is at the vet and it happened in a really distressing way, and you always pet your dog with this one part of your body or something like that. During the time when you're stressing about the dog, you're separate from the dog, you're worrying about the dog has been torn from you. That is when your cells undergo the adaptation. So in this process, they literally kill off and become numb to protect you from feeling the pain, the loss, the either physical pain, the physical sensation that is no longer present, or the emotional loss, the psychological pain of missing that touch. Your cells literally go numb. How profound is that? Your body is saying, oh my God, there's something I wish that I was touching, but it's not here. That's distressing for these evolutionary reasons of how that kind of denotes our bonds within familial or pack or herd dynamics, which would ensure our survival. I'm going to numb this part of your body in order to adapt to that. And then once the dog comes home, we're back together, I know the dog's fine, the dog, we're reunited, that's when the cells start replenishing themselves. So the cell loss is now refilled with fresh cells, but in that healing process of restoration, that's when we have like the blistering, the flaking, the swelling, all these things, the itchiness, the redness. So this is the case with eczema. Now, one other thing I want to say is talking about chronic issues. So chronic issues basically happen when the conflict that is associated with the issue never has time to complete the healing phase. So let's just say with the example with the dog, maybe it's every day you're being traumatically separated from your dog. And the trauma here, it doesn't have to be this big T trauma. It just has to be something acutely emotionally distressing that catches you off guard. It surprises you and shocks you. You were not prepared for it. Like, when the fight or flight response kicks in, like you're at work and you kind of get a comment that catches you off guard and that is what I mean by catches you off guard. So let's say with the dog, it's something that is happening every single day. Maybe your dog has to undergo medical care and every day you have to bring it to the vet. And this is a very distressing situation for you to be separated in this way. And every day, the healing phase, maybe when the dog comes home and you are back together, you start going through the healing phase and the symptoms start manifesting, but the next morning you have to do it again. So it keeps getting interrupted with more tracks, what German New Medicine calls tracks, which I just think about as triggers. It's anything that's even associated to the event that can also trigger that particular response. So it doesn't even have to be your dog's going to get the medical care. It now could also be your mom's watching your dog for the day and you're nervous about that because it's never been with your mom. And maybe that now reminds you of the original separation. And so it could be any track or any repetition of the conflict or anything, just like we know from trauma healing with our amygdala, anything that resembles the original conflict or that you even associated with it. Like, if this mug I was holding and drinking when my dog first started having the seizure, maybe I develop a track to this coffee. Or just like I was talking about earlier with the bean protocol, when I was eating the black bean soup and then I became violently ill with a stomach virus, my brain associated that to the black bean soup, even though the black bean soup was not the cause. So these things can now become tracks in German New Medicine that can also cause symptom flare-ups. Okay, so now let's get into how I used these things that I learned, these ideas, these concepts, and how I applied them to myself to get rid of my eczema. First things first. So when I first discovered these ideas, I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. Could this be? And once again, I don't know. I have not verified these things. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a biologist, a medical doctor, any of these things. Also, German New Medicine does not in any way argue that the medical system is not needed, because it absolutely is. So I just also wanted to throw that out there. Nor do I personally believe that. But I just say this to say, I have no way of verifying if these things are true. All I know is I took some ideas and experimented with them in my own personal experience, and this is what happened. The first shift that I experienced that was so profound was I stopped reacting to my symptoms. And this is such a sleeper shift for healing in all arenas, is to stop reacting to the thing you're trying to get rid of. Whether it's something about yourself, whether it's a relationship dynamic, whether it's your relationship to food, like this mirrors healing my relationship to emotional eating and binge restrict cycles so closely. It's just such a foundational principle of starting to unravel and transform a pattern where you have to completely stop shaming yourself and completely stop criticizing yourself and treating this as if it's something you can control with your conscious mind, because you absolutely cannot. And I applied this to my eczema. Before this, I would be so hard on myself, and just, especially with the bean protocol or food, like, oh, you shouldn't eat that. Or I drank the decaf latte and the pastry on Saturday and now I'm having this flare up. And like, what did I do to cause this? And I would clean the house, I'm doing the dishes, and now my hands are burning and it hurts so bad. And I'm so frustrated that I have this, and adding on all of this secondary pain and gunk onto the issue that is so unhelpful. And I did the same thing when I was healing my relationship to food. I remember I hit this point on my healing with my body image and my emotional eating and all these things in my body when I just had to say, yeah, I am emotionally eating. And I'm going to stop fighting this. I'm going to stop fighting this, because that is just more repression coming in to try and manage the problem consciously and kind of hover above it without actually sinking into what this is really about for me. And so the first step had to be acceptance. It had to be accepting, yeah, I've gained weight. Yeah, or I am subject to emotionally eating. Relationship with food is super roller coastery, and it's out of control for me. It's kind of like that. So that in and of itself took off a huge pressure valve where I could just start observing my eczema. The second thing is I started to track. I started to investigate. I started to listen to stories of people healing their chronic symptoms. I started to try and create timelines and figure out, when did this start? When did it get worse? Why was it really bad at this particular time? Why is it bad now? Where is it appearing on my hands? And I also just started to even track my flare-ups. Like before this, I didn't even know or realize, I wasn't paying attention to the fact that at times, like my eczema would go through the really dry, numb phase, and then it would go through the red, blistery, hot, bleedy, gross phase, and then it would go through like the scaling over healing phase. I didn't even know that that was a thing, because A, it was so chronic, it was so constantly being interrupted that it wasn't clear when the distinct phases were, and B, it was also just so pervasive in my life. Like I just knew my hands were fucked up and they were never normal, and I just wasn't paying attention to it. So even that, just starting to even notice like, oh, it's flaring right now, it's itchy right now. It was like one step towards starting to pay attention to when the flare-ups were actually happening. Now, something in German New Medicine that I have heard just through my, self-learning is that, you want to find kind of like the original event. And for me, I had to completely release finding the original event, because I could not for the life of me. This issue had become so chronic. I don't believe I was dealing with one original root. It had become so embedded into my life that I could not find this one historical thing that was causing it. I eventually figured out that it was related to a particular relationship dynamic. It wasn't necessarily a specific person, but it was the way in which I had a relationship to specific people. And it was multiple individuals, and it had to do with a certain relationship dynamic with these people. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out one root cause, but what I realized with my eczema was that there were so many tracks over the years. It even from 2017 or 18 until 2023, when I first started working on it, there had been so much change in my life and relationships and environments that I eventually realized it wasn't one continuous trigger that had been present the whole time, but it was a pattern of relationships that had been present. And so I had to kind of throw the idea in the trash that it's one specific thing. And I had to realize that all these kind of micro continuous flare-ups were related to a more of a relationship pattern that was persistent in my life than a particular individual. Now, also by this time, my eczema was better than it had been in the past. So like I said, in 2021 was the worst it had ever been with spreading to all these other areas of my body. I also forgot to mention I was on topical steroids for a long time, longer than I was supposed to be, because I didn't know that there was a time limit on how much you were supposed to use them. And so I used those for months. My skin had become, in some areas, like, you know how it like messes up your skin texture? I forgot to throw that in there, but I also did that for a long time. And that was the worst it had ever been, which was in 2020, 2021. But by this point in 2023, it was still chronically present on my hands. It was a little less widespread than it had been, but still, if I wasn't doing the bean protocol, it was present on my hands. So everything started to click into place after my husband and I, now husband at the time, boyfriend, we went on vacation for a week, for a full 7 days. And during that week, I noticed that every day during that trip, my eczema got better. And it got better to the point where by day like 5 of the trip, my eczema had totally cleared. And this was the first time that this had happened to me since the inception of my eczema. This had never happened, except for when I was on the bean protocol. I'm not eating beans. We're on vacation. I'm eating whatever, whenever, multiple coffees a day on many days, traveling, all these factors are all over the place. And my eczema completely cleared up. And this was such an aha moment for me. Now, many people, you hear these things of people who go on trips and their digestive problems are gone because the food is so much cleaner here, or the water must be so different here, or the air, whatever it is. And maybe those things are true, but I also think that what happens a lot of times when we get out of our regular environment is that all of the tracks and all of the triggers are no longer in our vicinity. And we're in a place where nothing is triggering the issue. We don't have an association to anything that we're doing. The daily routine's different. The foods are different. There's not even time to kind of like develop a pattern or trigger around something because it's all foreign. We don't have a lot of the stress of our day-to-day, of finances, of work, of different relationships. So we're just not having all of the tracks and triggers. And I started to really get clues from this because I was like, okay, whatever is causing this, it's something in my day-to-day, obviously, and it's not present now. Something else about chronic symptoms is that with my eczema, I knew it had to be something that I was encountering every day, multiple times a day, because of how chronic it was. The eczema never cleared. I think that at one point during this sleuthing period, which by the way was like a year altogether, it was like spring 2023 to spring, summer 2024, of me trying to unpack this, not doing beans at all, regular diet, coffee every single morning, not really worrying about anything with diet. Once again, just trying to unpack this. I think I started to notice there were certain times when it was a little bit more clear, but it was so chronic, it was getting interrupted all the time. So I was like, whatever it is something I'm dealing with on a daily basis, multiple times a day, most likely. So I go on this trip and I'm like, okay, this is wild. This has never happened before. It's completely gone. I'm seeing my skin for the first time in ever. Aside from being on the bean protocol, I guess it confirmed the power. You can heal this. You can get rid of this because you're doing nothing different in food, diet, daily rhythm is different, but nothing else is different. You are just on vacation right now. So I go back home and I double down on noticing the pattern. And this was very key because it had all cleared. I could then track the reemergence, which was so helpful because, like I said, it was so chronic. I could never really see when it was appearing. So I began to track the reemergence, and I began to notice that every single day there was a particular time of day when it would go through its biggest flare. Like essentially it would be the most itchy, blistering, red, like kind of like the breakout would come on. And I then knew, okay, according to this German New Medicine lens, I'm in the healing phase. Like whatever I just went through, I was perceived as the threat and the challenge. And I just perceived psychologically that I'm through it. And now the symptoms are having their presentation. So every single day I began to notice there was a particular time of day when that was happening. Pretty soon thereafter, I linked it to a particular dynamic that was happening around that time. And I just also want to say, if you're dealing with something like this and trying to get to the bottom of it, it was unexpected. It was unexpected. It was not like, oh, right at this time of day, this person said something really rude to me or like something like that. It was like so subtle. And this is how, like for me, the conflict associated with my eczema, it had become so pervasive. It was this deeply pervasive relational anxiety that I had that was so part of my day-to-day. I didn't even notice that it was there. It had become so normal. I was just like, oh yeah, this is what it is. Like, this is just something that's happened. Again, so unconscious. I wasn't having those thoughts. It was just so a part of things that when it all came to light, I was like, interesting. But indeed, it was when I tuned into what was actually happening for me in my body during these moments, there was this feeling of like, oh, I really want to separate. I just want to separate. That was the specific way that I was perceiving it. It wasn't like, oh, I want to be mad at this person or deal with this or this or that. It was just like, I just want to like get away kind of thing. I also never got to the root of why it was specifically on my hands. Like that's a thing in German New Medicine. Like it's like an imprint of like the part of your body that amygdala kind of snapshot associated with the event. I never got to the root of that for myself. I never did, but it wasn't important. So I boil it down to this one specific moment and I start to hammer that relational trigger with the full force of all the tools in my toolbox, which I have been preaching on this podcast for years at this point. So if you're a listener, you know what I'm talking about. I was bringing that emotional alchemy, like we were in the inner child healing moments every single day. I was going down there into the shadows and grieving and moving through. And man, there was some stuff there that I had been totally just pushing down just enough out of sight because it was so automatic. This is when everything changed. So I noticed on day X, it was like day 1 of me noticing this particular time of day and this relationship trigger are linked to the eczema in just my little field notes notebook of me being an experimenter. Day 1, I'm like, okay, we're hammering this trigger. This is on day 1. So this is what we're coming in with. Like this was the daily experience. I know it's hideous. I'm sorry you have to see it, but it's important. So day 1, I'm like, there's a correlation. We're alchemizing this shit and we're getting it out of me. Goodbye to this trigger. We do it. Day 2, eczema starts improving. Eczema starts improving by like 10 to 15%. Do it again. Same time of day, same relational trigger. Feeling that, you know what it's like. I don't need to tell you when you're up in there and you're doing that guttural processing. Okay. Day 2, day 3, eczema is like 20% better the next day. Every single day for the course of, it was less than 10 days. I hammered this thing. This is the eczema on the first day, and this is the eczema after 8 days. Every single day for the course of those 7 days, the eczema reduced until it reached literally gone. It was 95% gone by the end of that time. And after that, it would occasionally like flare a little bit. Even to this day, it will occasionally flare like 3%. Like there'll be like 3 little blisters that go away. Eczema is gone forever since then. Now, again, there's minor flares, but this was my everyday. This was my everyday for 5 years. After 1 week of making the association and hammering the trigger, eczema gone. Someone explain that to me. Explain that to me. No dietary changes, no changes in caffeine, no changes in sunlight, no changes in the shampoo, the water, the faucet, the mold in the walls, the laundry detergent, or anything else. Only addressing this one particular relationship dynamic, and my eczema cleared 95% in the span of 7 days. I'm sitting here today, eczema gone. I know this sounds crazy, but that was my experience. I also think it's important to say, during this time, going through the portal, like if you have experienced that deep healing, you went down the chute into the unconscious material that needs to be healed and moved through, and you go down the chute and you surrender and you are able to contain it and you're able to hold it while fully staying intact with who you are and not becoming overwhelmed by it, but you're fully surrendering to it at the same time and feeling it and grieving it, led to me showing up in these very just small different ways. It wasn't that one day I came out and I did this or that or addressed the same. None of that ever happened. It just incrementally changed the perspective that I had, which just informed the way I showed up and almost made this particular pattern that was so present in my life over 5+ years a non-thing. It was a non-thing. Of course, there's still the faintest memory of it. My body remembers, my hand in between my fingers remembers, because I'll get these little dry patches from time to time, but it is nowhere near as prevalent as it was. And German New Medicine talks about this so beautifully, and so does Jungian psychology, where in German New Medicine, they say, you have really resolved the conflict. I believe it's when you like forget about it or you can laugh about it. You can genuinely laugh. You can giggle at the thing. How many times it's like someone trying to like tell you that they moved through this thing, but it's like, are they laughing at it? That's how detached from it that they think it's funny? And I'm not saying you have to think your deepest trauma is funny, because I certainly don't for a lot of things, but like there are things that now in my past that I'm like, LOL, like there's a lightness to it. There's a total lightness to it because it's been so metabolized and digested. And that's what German New Medicine is kind of saying, like, your conflict does not resolve unless you're at that point. I think I heard this from some German New Medicine podcast. I really think I did, but it was also like, or you literally forget about it. And this rings super true to me from like a psychological perspective, where when you transform a conflict that has been chronic or that you've been in, it moves out of your consciousness. It goes from being something that you're like constantly chewing on. It's so central. It's like a theme. It's like you're wanting to talk about it with everyone, and your psyche is literally chewing on it to try and get its arms around it and digest it. And once it has been digested, it's not that it like neatly is packaged up and then put on a shelf. It's like it dissolves and becomes a part of the fabric of who you are. And it goes into the tapestry of your being, and it is digested and it's transformed into something else. And you no longer even conceive of this particular challenge or storyline or theme in the same way. It literally goes out of your consciousness. You can even sometimes kind of forget that that was a chapter. That happened to me with this eczema healing episode. Once my eczema vanished, I had the thought, you should probably do a podcast on this, but it's so not an issue. It's not even something I think about, that it's like it almost never happened. It's like filed away into a different category of my psyche and my memory. And this ties in so perfectly with Jungian analytical psychology and a quote from Carl Jung, which I only heard secondhand on the This Young in Life podcast from Deb Stewart, who's a Jungian analyst, who said, we don't solve our problems, we just grow bigger than them. And that illustrates this so perfectly. It's not that I held on to the problem or the conflict that was associated with my chronic eczema and I finally healed it. It's that I grew bigger than it. It became more appropriately sized. This particular relationship dynamic that was correlated with it became more appropriately sized within my psyche, within how I was conducting my life, within the landscape of my relationships. I just became bigger than the problem. It's not that I went up above it. It's that I just expanded beyond it and around it. So that is where I'm going to leave it today. Thank you so much for listening to this episode and coming along in this episode with me and telling this story. If there are other things you want to know about this process or about this story, you can leave a comment or you can submit a comment via the link below or just comment on the YouTube video. If you want to learn more about German New Medicine, I will link the episode with Abigail Puccioni, who is a German New Medicine educator. I also recommend her podcast. I'll link both of those things below. And I will also link the episode where I first discussed doing the Bean Protocol and healing my relationship with food. I'll link that one below. I really hope that this episode, if you're on a healing journey of some kind and you have this feeling that it's linked to something psychological or emotional or psychosomatic, I hope this gave you a little spark of inspiration not to give up, not that you should not seek medical attention and consult with a healthcare professional, but that if you are on the journey of unraveling something for yourself and that this approach resonates with you and is appropriate for what you're going through, that it just gives you a little bit of hope. Thanks for listening, and I will talk to you in the next one.